Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight's conversation is going to focus on the new 2018 Penal Code, which was passed in Parliament in June of this year. This is the new Penal Code has caused a lot of debate in some circles, and we're here. Focus on tonight is to understand the prominent changes in this code, with also focus on defamation as well as adultery. To shed light on these issues, we're joined. Nkunda, where she is a partner from Trustlaw Chambers. Thank you for honoring our invitation.
Pleasure.
My name is Diana MPC. I'm part of The Square. As always, I'm joined by my lovely resident panelists of The Square. You know them. Welcome to The Square.
Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. Charles and Bernard.
Diana, how are you?
Good.
Good.
As always, you know the drill. Before we get into the thick of things, we have a weekly highlight, a recap of the week thus far. And I'll ask my colleagues to just share briefly some of... Start with you.
Two things. One, OEF, but I'll access. We dealt on it a lot last week. But I've been seeing adverts on TVR, and we sing this song here on The Square around institutional coordination all the time. Reg is up in arms and making a lot of noise around people who build along power lines. The city of Kigali and anybody else out of the city who gives the planning approval gives people planning approval to build whatever, commercial building, residential, whatever, and it gives you a setback. Setback, simple languages, it says your building starts here and should stop here. Now, today, they are telling people stop building. Some whose huge commercial buildings are along the way, they've taken up loans. Others who are already living in their houses. Others whom Rema said plant trees. And others who the RTD has said, no, wait a bit, don't go beyond this level. We're going to put a pedestrian walkway and a bicycle lane. And then all of a sudden they're saying, no, wait a second. The power lane, whether it's medium voltage or high voltage or low voltage, should be 6 and X whatever meters beyond. Somebody needs to pay a price for this poor institutional coordination, for the government entities to wake up and realize they should stop taking people for granted. Yeah, it's painful.
Interesting. Brenna?
I've been reflecting on the death, I think now it's been confirmed, of the Saudi journalist.
Yes.
And
Jamal Khashoggi.
Yes, who was writing opinion pieces for the Washington Post. And it's sad to see the hypocrisy around, the whole issue, mainly because you have a country like the US protecting its strategic interests with Saudi Arabia and not coming forward to do the big brother that, to act like the big brother they like to be. That's one. Two, if that happened in any other country that, the US doesn't consider to be a strategic partner, I think it would be hell. It would be hell. It would be hell. So it's very depressing. It's quite sad. I mean, of all places, if you can imagine a journalist being killed in an embassy, yes, and then you have the big brother trying to go around it. For me, I think it goes to reaffirm what we've already said about the hypocrisy in the global environment. People choose when they feel something is important, and it's always about their interests.
Strategic interests.
Yes, strategic interests.
Ephraim, before we get to our guest.
Actually, for me, it's in line with that. The largest poster child of America's hypocrisy, Nikki Haley, resigned. I think it was this past week, if I'm not wrong. She resigned from UN. And obviously there was scandal about why and how and who. But I think for me, just in line with what she was saying, especially when it comes to to the UN, and some of the they like to take a high horse, or at least they stay in a. And this is a clear example of that. Yeah.
Moise, would you also like to chip in?
Thank you. Thank you very much. The OEF. First of all, congratulations, Rwanda. Congratulations, Louise Mushikiwabo, our very own. And I mean, what I liked very much as Rwandan is the traditional dance. I don't know whether you've seen the very popular clip. Yeah, so it was very good, and you know, so this shows clearly when Africa is coming together and when we are united, then comes in the strength and how we can, how far we can go while being together. So I think this is a great achievement for Africa, Rwanda, and Louise herself.
Absolutely.
So, congratulations.
Yeah. Just in addition to that, I think in this week also we saw the Ethiopian cabinet announcement, and which goes to reaffirm also the issue of champions. Rwanda has been championing women in leadership, so it's good to see that some of its very good friends are walking the talk.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean it's a shame that this is 2018 and it's still big news that women, when women are appointed, it's big news. I mean, it's 2018, for Christ's sake. It shouldn't be. But it goes to show that we have a long way to go. Yeah, so we need more countries, to do that. And hopefully it will be not news anymore.
I was going to say, in relation to Ethiopia, I think probably one of the biggest issues a lot of detractors have with Ethiopia, at least at this moment, is that they feel like the radicalization or the radical implementation of some of these reforms is just too fast. So that like you do X, Y, Z in a short period of time, it seems haphazard. It seems like you're just correcting things but without any coordination. And I think one of the things that people were asking around the appointment of women was what was the thought process? Was it just for representation's sake, or was there actually a vetting process? And I'm saying I'm for it, but I believe that there's been a lot of
on how the whole thing was crafted.
I think if the reform process is positive,
but
then along the way you can.
Don't forget. This is politics. Don't forget. Part of politics is optics. If something seems like somebody's this is a conversation for another day.
I wanted to share I rarely do, but I want to share my key highlights for this week, and I found it really disturbing. It was to do with this pastor in South Africa. I don't know if you're following it. Some pastor was literally sexually grooming some of the young congregants of his church, starting as early as 14. I think, and she was testifying about what happened to her over the years. But it was just the sexual abuse victim, the lack of protection, the questions that were being asked. It was Africa this week.
But there was also
but it goes in line with what we were talking about on the show about this.
And there was a priest also. There was a priest, I think, in Kenya who's been harassing parishioners, women.
Yeah, so this is what we talked about this morning.
They're all crimes.
Yes, exactly.
So it's not just pastors. You have priests, some Catholic guys.
Religion across the board, we need to work on those issues. So Moise, thank you very much for coming on the show. The first question I'd like to ask you, and also for the sake of our viewers and also for the sake of our panel, is just if you could tell us. First of all, it has 335 articles compared to 766 of the previous. As well, and we understand this was to update different. If you could give us just, for the sake of time, we are not going to go. But if you could just give us a general overview of the code and the prominent changes that were made before we focus on the two elements that I mentioned.
The first major change is that if you look at the title of the new law, itself, you will notice that we no longer have a penal code. So now we have a law that is determining offenses and penalties in general. And people tend to have this calling of a penal code because previously we used to have like this kind of penal code. And the one that was repealed, you will notice that this was an organic law establishing the penal code. So this is the law of 2012. That's when we had that law that was repealed, but this new one, and then it became a law determining offenses and penalties in general. So there are almost like 5 to 6 major changes that we can discuss on this show, given the time we have.
It's limited, though.
It's limited.
Let me remind you,
yeah.
it's limited. Yes.
So we used to have something called solitary former penal code of 2012. And one of the examples was, like, for instance, when there was for an offense of child defilement, we used to have a penalty that was life imprisonment with this kind of solitary confinement or special treatment. So it came up that in the RCS there was no way of implementing this kind of
RCS is Rwanda
Correctional Service.
Rwanda Correctional Service, of implementing this kind of solitary confinement when someone is locked up in a detention facility in any of in the country. So, but also when you're looking at the new law governing offenses and penalties, you will notice that even though that aspect of being solitary confined was removed, you will also notice that on this issue of child defilement, the law became a little bit harsh, in a sense that this time around there is no mitigating circumstances in one way or the other when you are committing this kind of offense. Then it's life imprisonment without any kind of mitigating circumstances, especially when you've committed this for a child under 14. Yeah. So that's something that people should understand, and guys out there that were thinking or have been going through these kind of offenses, they have to be warned about that.
So the question I'm asking is, so now the new we said it's not a penal code. What's the official term for it if it's not a penal code now?
So just call it a law determining offenses and penalties.
So in this new law, you're saying that before defilement used to, especially for children under the age of 14, defilement will be life imprisonment without any mitigating circumstances. Yes.
No, I'm saying the fact law, like the previous law was providing for life imprisonment with special provisions. That's the term that is used in the law. But it's a kind of like this kind of solitary confinement. Yes.
Okay.
So in Kinyarwanda they used to call it Burundu y'umwihariko. That's the term they use. So it's a kind of, someone would be in jail, but would also be like solitary confined, not allowed to meet others like outside and everything. So the implementation of this kind of penalty has been problematic, and this ended up like being changed in the new law determining offenses and penalties. And the major change that I was talking about is that when you look at the penalty itself now, that means when it comes to mitigating circumstances. Or when you have committed this kind of child defilement under 14, for a child under 14, then there is no mitigating circumstance.
Okay.
Totally concur.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. So that means it's a signal like that is being sent, because these things have been really taking another.
No mercy under 14.
No mercy.
And then also as we move forward, one of the other major changes was the law on basically on abortion, whereby previously, compared to the previous legal regime, you do not need a judge's, court order or a judge's permission to actually carry out the procedure. It can now happen between a woman and her doctor without waiting for court documents.
I'm very much impressed that she's been following. This is very much
a lot of Rwandans have been following this.
So this is also another kind of change that has happened. Why is it that the government or the parliament, by the time they were enacting this law, has taken this kind of move? The reason is that we used to have cases whereby someone would go and apply for a court order, and then you would get a court order where the mom is already 8 months, and it's only about 1 month to deliver. So that means in such circumstances, even though the law was providing that this kind of case were to be handled with urgency, but the practice have been showing that the problems were that at 8 months, then at that level, I don't even see any doctor who would allow you or go through this kind of process. It's very delicate, and you might end up even losing the mom's life. So now the decision that was taken, or the law provides that it's the doctor that is going to be taking these kind of decisions. But very importantly, what people need to know is that the Minister of Health is going to enact a kind of ministerial order that will be guiding, like setting guidelines of how these things should be happening. And another thing is, even though it might be happening that you've got a doctor that authorizes that you go through that medical procedure that ends up by abortion, then if after it's proven that you've done it for a wrong motive, then you can be prosecuted.
So what constitutes a wrong motive?
Well, there is a number of motives that are provided for by the law that allows someone to go through like this kind of when the mother have been raped, like for instance. So that's a reason why they can seek to be like to go through this medical procedure and then remove the.
Or if the child of the mother or I think if the life of the mother is at stake.
Yeah. There is a number of things that are highlighted in the law, but whenever it's proven that the motive that you would have advanced to go through this procedure was not true, then you can.
So if I understand this right, the change in the penal code was more to address the backlog that was created by having it go through a judge, versus us being more liberal in allowing abortion to happen, because it has not changed the provisions, has it?
I mean,
if I may, previously abortion was a criminal offense, period. Today they are saying there are circumstances under which it will be allowed. For crying out loud health reasons, maybe the mother has a very, very a terminal illness, for crying out loud, and that terminal illness, they want to protect the child or the fetus from that terminal illness. So previously you'd have to go to get a court injunction for that to be done. Today, if the doctor decides, But let me give you a practical example, and I'm sure that's where you're coming from, Ephraim. If today, we are lucky a doctor is not on the panel here. If a doctor makes the patient pregnant.
A doctor makes the patient pregnant?
Yes.
Okay.
If a doctor impregnates a patient and writes a medical report that in my own judgment, this pregnancy should be terminated. The pregnancy will be terminated. But that's the point Moise is raising. If tomorrow it is determined that the reason for the termination of the pregnancy was because the doctor was protecting his selfish interests, then the doctor will be followed.
Not following along the motives of the provisions in the current.
So again, hence my point. So the change in the penal code, because there is a belief, and I know this was on the news yesterday, there is the belief that abortion has been legalized.
That's the misconception.
That's the misconception.
I think you raise a very
that's the misconception.
Yes,
so the idea is that it's still illegal under certain circumstances, and what the only thing that the change in the penal code has done is removed the judge from that process. The bureaucracy of So I think that's just the point.
But that's far from making abortion legal, actually, because if you look at the conditions themselves. First of all, the requirement is that the abortion has to be done by a qualified specialist. So, looking at the doctor per
ratio.
If we use that, I mean, how is that practical? And again, if we look at the statistics we have so far, about 60,000 illegal abortions have been taking place. So the law, in my view, is far from making abortion legal. I think what the law has simply done is to allow
ease the process of urgent abortions.
Yes, but fundamentally, we still have a problem.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think now that's where the journalists have to play an important role, because you find that, and you know this, Berna, sensationalist headlines would be abortion, new law enacted to ease abortions in Rwanda. Without stating,
I think that's a mouthful. They can just say you can now abort.
I think the story has to be worded in such a manner that it says it's clear that the conditions have remained the same. It's just that you have removed the.
I'll give you another example.
But first, we'll talk about that later. There's so much meat in this particular topic. I think we should just delve into what we invited you here today. So what I want to focus on is now, you've given us an overview. These are some of the highlights, but I think it's out there in the public. I know various news houses have been publishing, from solitary confinement to child defilement, to defamation, to abortion, to community service.
To adultery.
To adultery. So what we're here to talk about now is defamation and adultery. So I'll start with defamation. You know that last year Rwanda revised the penal code in December, decriminalizing defamation, which was a criminal offense attracting a jail term of up to 1 year and a fine of up to Rwandan francs 5 million. But however, as of today, Article 233 and Article 236 of the new penal code has withheld decriminalizing cartooning. And by cartooning, it means cartoons that are drawn by the media fraternity that depict politicians or high public officials.
That's humiliating.
That is an issue, I think, with the media fraternity, and this is also why we're here on the square discussing it. So from your legal perspective, what's your take on this before I invite my panelists to give their points?
Well, two things. One is that, if you allow me, on the first aspect of the highlights, there are two things that I wanted to highlight that were also part of the new things. One is people dealing in traffic of drugs.
Yes.
Be aware that life imprisonment is waiting for you.
It's it's now harsher.
Life for crap.
Is there solitary confinement?
No, there's no solitary confinement, but life imprisonment. This is changing from the time whereby it used to be like 3 to 5 years. So now it's life imprisonment. Drugs are becoming a serious problem.
Are drugs, they're becoming a serious problem in this country?
Yeah, it's a very serious problem. If you've been following like the news and the people in the government are explaining that it's becoming a serious problem. Second is what you've just mentioned. We used to have a kind of category of penalties that were imprisonment, fines, degradation of like being removed the civil rights of doing something like voting, being a public servant and everything. So now we have a new form of community services. So that means if today Haba is a medical doctor and then a decision is taken that he should be given like community services, you might be going and be given the assignment of going and keep
Muganda for the rest of my life.
Muganda, or you can be given it for 6 months.
Service, it's fine.
Yeah.
As opposed to jail time. Or
Yes. So it's now becoming like people can go out and work for the community
It's part of rehabilitation.
It's part of rehabilitation instead of going through this kind of being locked up somewhere.
Yes.
So these are the two things that I wanted to highlight to add
in
addition to what we've discussed. So coming back on the defamation issue, which is the main one that we are discussing tonight, it has to be understood that defamation was removed from the penal code we used to have of 2012, general defamation. But there is this kind of discussion that has been going around on the aspect of, on the issue of cartoons. Well, I don't know why people made it a kind of big deal. Of course, I understand in my own perspective that if I look at the law, what the article provides, I myself had a kind of thinking that it was not right if we are taking the route of decriminalizing the defamation, then we better go for all. Because if you look at the law, it's like as if they've singled out a certain category of leaders, member of parliament, high-ranking officials in the police, in the army, and then going up to, of course, the President of the Republic. But my understanding is that when we have such a law enacted, it has to be general. It has to be impersonal. It has to be serving the protection of the entire society, in the entire Rwandan society. So you can't just have a certain group and category of people being protected more than the others. Eventually, this is a very critical situation because it comes in whereby you find yourself like enacting a law that is unconstitutional.
So you say
there's no one who is above the other.
There is no one who is above the other. And when you look at the Constitution, you notice that the equality before the law is one of the major principles. And the law should protect like each and everyone in a manner that is quite equal. So my understanding is that it would be better if we do it like we do away with this kind of defamation being criminalized, being a criminal offense, and then there is a number of remedies in civil, whereby I know that Bana has published in the East African an article that is against me, which has harmed me in one way or the other, then I can go to the civil court and seek remedy.
But you know, I would say why I feel like criminalizing it solves a certain solution. You know, unfortunately or fortunately, Rwanda is a very small country, in the sense that if Bernard does go write an article about you, and she knows the only reprimandation she will probably face is a civil case, which might also take some time. What ends up happening is that my reputation gets damaged, or your reputation gets damaged. She's written the article and she moves on. But if it becomes criminal, it puts her in a position where she has to think twice about publishing something that could be potentially detrimental. And I say this because we know this, frankly speaking. One rumor, however true or false it is, immediately it goes out into Kigali, it is out. And it's very hard to backtrack, no matter how
just
true or
very
false
quickly,
it is.
Yeah, if
So
I
for
may-
me, I frankly, I would say, for me,
I want to
frankly,
get your point. Yeah.
so me, frankly speaking, I feel for the sake of reputational protection, like he says, one, we have to equalize defamation.
Yeah, but just very quickly.
But
your
I would
point
rather, if we criminalize it, it helps prevent it helps prevent us from...
criminalize what? Cartooning?
No,
Or
just
defamation.
defamation.
So you're
Defamation
saying
in
we
general.
should go back?
Go backwards.
We should go backwards.
I
Okay,
believe so.
We'll come back to you. Bernard and Charlie, your
Okay,
point.
mine is very, very simple. You see,
That's quite loaded.
And I'll give very live examples. You know, we some years back, and not too long ago, we had a very sad situation of one of the Rwandan government ministers who literally picked a hoe. They went to a school, confiscated phones and other tablets and stuff from students, piled them in one place, and this guy got a hoe and started
Smashing them.
smashing.
Because phones were not
phone
allowed in
gadgets,
schools.
because phones were not allowed in schools. Then there was a cartoon of a leader digging phones. Now, in the context today, you'd say that that person, and I totally agree with Advocate Moise, that if that leader felt offended by that cartoon, he should go to the civil courts to say, you have wronged me. But why should the readership or the populace be denied of rich satire? Satire is part of the way we communicate, and this is not unique to Rwandans. We, especially Rwanda, if you look at how poetic we are and the way we express ourselves, we are very richly satirical society. So why should you deny us of satire? And why should that satire be applicable to an executive secretary of a Murenje and not a minister who hacks phones? Yeah, so the double standard is what I don't agree with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And especially as someone from the media fraternity, I think we're all dying to hear your thoughts on
Just
this.
I'm glad that he put it very rightly that no one should be above the law. That's one. And two, I think the people who are crafting the law probably thought they would be in office for a very long time. Huh? So what happens if you're replaced?
Yes.
What happens? So people have to think about that. So the protection should be for everyone. And then two, I disagree with you.
Please.
Ephraim, I'm shocked.
Ephraim, because
shocked.
I think the focus should be on getting the journalists to be professional. Because in the first place, we shouldn't be having cases where journalists are just defaming people. So rather than focus on punishing them, which is the end result, focus on training them to be better journalists. That's one. And then two, part of the reason I think why we are seeing that they have moved to community service is essentially to say punishment does not necessarily stop crime as such. You always have to address the fundamental issues. So, because if I give you an example of defamation, sometimes you may have some tycoon pay a journalist to write a story. That same tycoon will be willing to defend the journalist, if they go to court, But then there it goes back to the professionalism, the ethics. Do you have journalists that take pride in ethics than the resources that are given to them?
Yes, I think this is I really like the very radical ideas that are going on the defamation. But in the interest of time, before we get to our Twitter feed, we're going to read some of the tweets on this topic that people have been writing to us about. But I'd like us to go to the next aspect of this conversation, which is adultery. With regards to this particular element of the new code, and Moise, I'll start by asking you if you can give us your thoughts and guidance on this, is that right now what the government proposed, and you also clarify if this is literally part of the new, what did you say, the law on penalties and
offenses.
And offenses. It's no longer
offenses and penalties,
not the penal codes per se. If there's the case of adultery and a spouse forgives the other, the court has prerogative to reject that forgiveness and still continue and try this particular couple and this particular spouse. So my question to you is, because a lot of people say it's the state trying to protect families, protect children, to protect generations so to come, but at the same time there are also people who say it's overreach of the state in personal affairs. What's your take on it before I ask my family panelists to weigh in?
All right, so I think what people need to understand is that government and the state owes families protection. And this is a constitutional principle in its Article 18, paragraph 1. So, in the Constitution, the government should guarantee the family being to allow the family to be the foundation of the society. That's where I think this is coming from. But again, I also think that while protecting the family, you can't just keep making everything a criminal, a crime, I mean. Or, because I understand, like for instance, if I'm coming to the question that Diana has just asked about, like the fact that now the offended spouse cannot have the right to stop the proceedings at any time. So
after maybe forgiving,
it used to be that the offended spouse could stop the proceedings at any certain level of proceedings, including by the time the prosecution has already filed the matter, had submitted the matter to the court. So now they've given the judge the ability to examine the kind of mercy that is coming from that spouse, whether it has to be considered or not. But initially, my point is, you can't protect a family when it becomes like, for instance, that whoever has committed these kind of offenses, because they are not only adultery, there is also concubinage, there is this kind of desertion of the family household for a period of 12 months. There is a number of offenses that are provided for by the law to be the offenses. Whereas on the other side, they are also being dealt with a civil law and persons, the law governing persons, and so this is where it's coming from. But I think the best way to go with this is to allow it to be on the civil part of the.
That is something Advocate Moise is not happy about, and I totally concur with you.
Yeah.
Because marriage, if I may just continue from there, and I'm sure where Advocate Moise is coming from is that marriage is a civil obligation. It emanates from a civil contract, and therefore it should continue being handled under civil jurisdictions. It just doesn't make sense that and I give just to emphasize the 2 points that he raised. Concubinage is a French word that comes from the word the concubine.
Yeah.
You have been living with a concubine for an X number of periods. The two of you, the couple have agreed to live together. Why should that be a criminal offense? You have left your spouse for whatever reason and gone to live with whoever you're going to live with for whatever reason. Maybe you've even gone to a monastery. Maybe you've gone to join priesthood. Maybe you've gone to a convent. Then why should that be a criminal offense because of the lifestyle that you have chosen? So I think that's where the lawmaker got it wrong. And it should not be a criminal offense that you've decided to use whatever God gave you in a different way.
But maybe to add on what Charles had just said, in a few words, it's been even problematic to prosecute and to follow up these kind of offenses.
That's exactly what. That was
Indeed,
my
how
question.
many cases have been brought before the court of law?
I mean, if you go talk to the prosecution and everything, you will realize that it's really problematic.
Yes.
And the reason why now the law comes in and says when it's now the case is already in court, let the judge assess whether it will be dropped or not. Why? Because we've been having cases whereby today one of the spouse comes and brings a claim to it used to be the police, now it's rape. And then right after like 2 or 3 days, then him or her comes in and says,
On second thoughts.
on second thought, having spent 3 days without being with my husband or with my wife, I think let's leave this story and go back home.
Yes, yes.
So
Implementation.
Just for me, I would like to come back on this because I would like to think, and I would like to think that the people who brought this law forward were thinking about the current situation across the country in terms of adultery and the effect it has on families as well as on children, as well as on economic livelihoods, And is it because this is aimed at protecting, this is my rationale, I don't really know what was behind it, whereby the court actually decides it's in the best interest to come and adjudicate such personal issues in the long-term view of protecting families.
But on what basis? How is that possible? Because clearly, from what he's telling us, what has been happening is that
it's problematic.
Yes, it is. So, on what basis are you going to regulate private affairs? As we know, there's a lot of consensus in this whole process.
Absolutely.
So how do you determine who is in the wrong and who is not when you have two adults that are consenting and
to a large degree.
If you ask me, the government has been
in the interest of time.
A small response.
Yes, a small response.
This is to say that you can't talk about protection of the family and the child's interest when one of the spouses is in prison.
That's true.
That's true.
Why don't we find a way of dealing with these issues? I don't know whether Mr. Prof should design something, come up with a certain policy of but also all this comes to the values of the society. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this kind of adultery, we wouldn't have this kind of concubine,
Yeah,
but the major aspect for me, or the major and the point here is, it's not by putting in jail one of the spouses.
Yes.
Will help
that is going to
Let's go to our Twitter feed, because on our Twitter feed we actually have people who are weighing in on this particular conversation. And the first person we have is Romeo, who says, in the new penal code, staff can easily take advantage of the interpretation of sexual harassment, Article 149. Can you elucidate on Article 149 and what we're being told by our person on Twitter?
Well, I've seen this tweet from Romeo.
Yes.
This is a friend of mine, but I couldn't understand the real question, because when you look at Article 149, sexual harassment is one of the offense that was provided for by the law, aiming at protecting the work environment of various people that are working. So it's you're not allowed, for instance, if you're the boss at work, you're not allowed to keep telling
give suggestive comments.
Yeah. So I mean
that's the point exactly, Advocate Moise.
Yes.
That it is very easy today. Diana is our boss here on the square.
Yes.
If she refuses, if I refuse to accept her offer for a drink tonight, and then tomorrow she doesn't pay the driver on time, the driver who happens to be my cousin, it is very easy for me to say that the driver is not being paid on time because of sexual harassment. So there's a loophole. That's the point. That's the point. Tomorrow, if in your law firm you don't pay your female secretary, or you don't promote her on time, it's very easy for her to say this is sexual harassment. I think that's the point, that the new law puts in place a very big loophole for people to take advantage of.
I mean, but let's also look at it like you can't just single out something like that and look at it in a, if I can say, in a negative way. But also, it gives also the responsibility to the bosses to be like decent people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, let the bosses be decent people and make sure that they are not like going through those kind of.
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
I agree,
yeah.
but
Yeah, but I think in principle, once we have such guidelines, then we will have the workplace. It should get better because then people know their boundaries.
Yes.
Because to be honest, for most females, you find that most men in the workplace don't feel there should be boundaries, so they can comment on,
with men
you know,
too.
on how you look, on, you know, all sorts of, you know, trivial things in the name of complimenting you, you know. So yeah, it would be good that, you know, we start to see people taking it serious, that once you make certain comments, they're actually suggestive. And you shouldn't be doing
Absolutely.
it. Yeah.
We also want to go to one of our next tweets. I'm actually impressed by the tweets that are coming in tonight because people seem to be following these articles. I didn't even know of Article 108. But Lim Babazi says Article 108 on infanticide only talks about women who commit the crime as a result of postpartum depression or by effects of lactation. Should it be assumed that all women that kill their infants suffer from the above? If not, what does it mean for the others? No liability? That's a complicated ask.
Well, I think here should be an issue of drafting, because it's literally says women who commit crimes as a result of postmortem depression or by effect of lactation. Should it be assumed that all women that kill their infants suffer from the above? I mean, I don't think so. I don't think so. Not all women that are killing their kids or their kids are suffering from this kind of depression. But this will lie in the power of the judge to assess and get to know really what was the intent and to get to know whether that person was really a decent person that ended up killing her infant.
So the law provides for that.
Yeah.
One quick question I had on my mind is, if you look at the provisions, for instance, around the family, do we actually have the critical mass of family lawyers that can actually handle these issues?
Advocate Moise, let me just interrupt you with supplementing on that. Coupling that with the fact that we have a very huge backlog of cases in our judicial system, and we to the extent that we keep reading reports in the social media and in all the other mainstream medias around, you go to the court and you have to wait hours before you actually see a judge, and then eventually when you see a judge and your case is read, it takes years, decades. It's hyperbole for purposes of rubbing in my point before you actually get a judgment. Then you ask yourself, are we actually doing the right thing? And Banner's point is extremely pertinent here. I'm sure you as somebody in the field, you must be extremely frustrated by some of these things that are happening in the system. Yes.
Well, coming back to Bernard's question, if I understand it well, you are asking whether we have like enough number of lawyers that are skilled in the family matters that can help dealing with this. So here comes in my capacity of being the secretary of the Bar Council. So we are now getting to 1,200 lawyers in
Across
Rwanda.
the country?
Across the country.
Just 1,000.
1,200.
Just 1,000.
What does that mean in terms of ratios of lawyer to
Citizen.
Well, it's still little. It's still little, if I can say. But again, look at it in terms of where we are coming from. The Bar Association was created in 1997. That's when Rwanda ever got the Bar Association like a professional body of lawyers in the history of the country. So by that time, when the Bar Association started, we were 37. I mean, I was not part of those, but they were 37. Only 37 lawyers. So throughout this period, last year we were celebrating 20 years. So we've come a long way, but we still think that there is more to be done. And that's how we are focusing on the specialization, get family lawyers, get corporate lawyers, get real estate lawyers, get energy lawyers, you know, in various fields. So now we are getting to such a point whereby capacity building, you know, like any institution in this country, given the history.
Absolutely. I think very, very valid points. We're coming to the end of our show, and I'd like us to just give our closing remarks. I'd like everyone to have a chance to give their closing remarks. There's the penal code, as you rightly said, it's now the law on
determining offenses and penalties.
Thank you for teaching us that. Ephraim, I'd like to start with you, your closing remarks on this topic.
I think my closing remarks is we want to wish you a happy birthday.
This is happening on Live TV.
Yeah, this is happening on Live TV.
Lady.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, you can put that down.
No, I'll wear it another time. Well, thank you very much. RBA, thank you very much for allowing this to happen on live television. This looks really interesting. Thank you, Ephraim and Charles and Berna, and to the entire team, as well as to you. We'll have a conversation after this show.
Please blow the candles. You have to blow the candles. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
Birthday.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you have closing remarks?
No, we don't.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Shanjak and the team here. So yeah, I'd like to leave our guest with the closing remarks for this particular session.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me at the square. I've been following you guys from the other side of the camera, and I'm happy to be part of this. And one thing is I want to tell like the viewers and Rwandans in general is that please read the Penal Code and other laws. Because it's very important to know your rights, very important to know what's going on and your obligations. I'm saying this because ignorance of the law is no excuse. Again, I know that the Rwandans have that capacity. If they can read the Bible and memorize the verses, then they can obviously read the law and understand what.
I should have read the Bible and have understood it. I feel like guys have read the Bible.
I mean, but given the kind of when you're meeting someone and starts explaining and he gives you the verses like already memorized.
You should do that with the penal code.
So that means you have capacity. So let's get to know our rights and our obligations.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much again to RBA and the lovely panelists of this. Thank you very much. I'd also like to thank our partners, Bourbon Coffee and Uzi Collections, for making this particular show very interesting and for the future to come. Please keep the conversation going using #TheSquareRW. And thank you for joining us. Have a good night.